Hey everyone! Today we're diving into an interesting chapter in Malta's history, a time when the island was under the rule of the Knights of St. John, a chapter often referred to as the Time of the Knights. This period spanned from 1530 all the way to 1798, and it saw Malta transformed from a simple island to a fortified stronghold and a thriving cultural center. It all started after the Knights, also known as the Hospitallers, lost their previous base in Rhodes to the Ottomans in 1522. Homeless and drifting around Europe, they were finally granted Malta, the neighboring island of Gozo, and the North African port city of Tripoli by Emperor Charles V, who also ruled as the King of Sicily. There was a catch though. They had to send a single Maltese falcon each year as tribute, a quirky yet symbolic payment to Charles's representative, the Viceroy of Sicily. When they settled in, the Knights chose the fortified town of Birgu as their headquarters. They wasted no time strengthening their defenses, especially at Fort St. Angelo, and the Knights even began minting their own currency. From their new base, they continued their battles against the Ottoman Empire and the infamous Barbary pirates. Their actions soon caught the attention of the powerful Ottoman forces, leading to a full-scale attempt by the Ottomans to conquer Malta in 1565. The siege failed, but it convinced the order that Malta was worth holding on to for good. This marked the beginning of Malta's Golden Age, an era marked by flourishing arts, grand architecture, and improved social conditions across the island. Over time, the Knights even claimed territories far beyond Europe, including a few small islands in the Caribbean, making them one of the smallest entities to attempt colonization in the Americas. Yet, like all things, the order's power began to fade. By the late 18th century, pressures from events like the French Revolution started to weaken them. And in 1798, Napoleon himself invaded Malta, forcing the order out and establishing French control. Though the Maltese people later rebelled and sought British protection, the legacy of the Knights would forever be woven into Malta's history. But let's rewind to the early years, back when the order was just starting out in Malta. In the 1550s they faced plenty of challenges, including a brutal attack by the Ottomans who captured Tripoli and devastated parts of the island. To recover, the Knights reinforced key locations, building up fortresses like St. Elmo and St. Michael and expanding the harbor defenses. But they also had their fair share of natural disasters, like a catastrophic tornado that struck between 1551 and 1556, reportedly killing hundreds and wrecking their ships. And even as they strengthened Malta, tensions with the King of Sicily lingered. When the order refused to take control of Mahdia, a city in Tunisia offered by Charles V, the king responded by blocking Malta's wheat supply, pushing the island to the brink of starvation. Ingenious as ever, the Knights brought in an Italian engineer to upgrade the mills on the island, ensuring the people wouldn't go hungry. And now let's talk about one of the most dramatic episodes in the Knights' history, the Great Siege of 1506. Imagine this: the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, sent a massive force of around 40,000 men to oust the Knights from Malta once and for all. They saw Malta as a key base that could potentially open the way for another invasion into Europe. At first, things looked bleak for the Knights and their 8,000 soldiers. The Ottomans were relentless, destroying towns, crushing defenses, and killing many of the Knights. By August, the situation was desperate. The defenders were exhausted and low on men, while the Ottoman troops continued their brutal assault. Some of the Knights even suggested retreating to the stronger Fort St. Angelo, but Grand Master Jean Parisot de Valette refused to back down, determined to hold the line. Meanwhile, help from Sicily was nowhere to be found. The Viceroy of Sicily seemed hesitant, likely torn between protecting his own territories and aiding the Knights, which could provoke Ottoman retaliation against Sicily and Naples. His delay almost spelled doom for Malta. But finally, after pressure from his officers, the Viceroy agreed to send reinforcements. In late August, the Ottomans made another massive assault, with wounded Knights joining in the defense. Despite the odds, the knights pushed back the attackers, and the Ottoman forces began to struggle. Disease, dwindling supplies, and the death of their skilled commander Dragut demoralized them. Their final attack on September 1st lacked strength, and morale among the Ottomans plummeted. Soon after, word spread that Sicilian reinforcements had arrived in Malaya Bay. The Ottomans, fearing they faced a large incoming force, abandoned the siege on September 8th. By the end, the knights had only about 600 men left who could still fight. Out of the vast Ottoman force, only around 15,000 soldiers made it back to Constantinople. The victory was a powerful symbol for the knights, and it led to the construction of Valletta, named after Grand Master de Vallette, as a fortified capital city that would become the knights' main base from 1571 onward. The aftermath of the siege also brought changes in religious control. In 1574, Pope Gregory XIII established the Roman Inquisition in Malta to mediate between the knights' leadership and the local church. This was part of a shift in authority, as previously, the Bishop of Palermo had overseen Malta's religious affairs. Then, in 1581, the order faced an internal crisis. Grand Master Jean de la Cazière was temporarily ousted in a mutiny led by some of his own knights, who declared Mataron Romiguez as the new leader. Pope Gregory intervened, summoning both La Cazière and Romiguez to Rome to settle the dispute. Ironically, Romiguez died shortly after arriving, and La Cazière was briefly reinstated before his own death in Rome. Moving into the 17th century, Malta experienced growth and innovation. One of the major projects was the Wignacourt Aqueduct, built between 1610 and 1615 to bring fresh water from nearby towns to Valletta. This infrastructure served the island until the early 20th century, with parts of it still standing today. The knights also focused on expanding Malta's defenses. Major fortifications were added around the Grand Harbor, including the Floriana and Santa Margherita lines, followed by the larger Cotoner lines. In the late 1600s, Fort Ricasoli was constructed at the entrance of the Grand Harbor, and Forts St. Elmo and St. Angelo were further strengthened. Though the Grand Harbor area was well fortified, most of Malta's coastline remained exposed. To fix this, Grand Masters over the years built a series of watchtowers along the coast, including the Wignacourt Towers and later the Lascaris and Derriden Towers. This network of towers was vital for keeping watch over the seas. Disaster struck in 1693 when a major earthquake caused severe damage across Malta, especially in the old capital of Mdina. The Norman-era cathedral was destroyed, and work began on a new Baroque cathedral in 1697, reshaping Mdina's skyline. At sea, the Order's navy was at its strongest, engaging in battles alongside European powers against the Ottomans, including the famous Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Corsairing, or privateering, was also a significant source of income, with Maltese ships capturing Ottoman vessels and bringing home wealth and slaves. For a brief time, the Order even ventured into the Caribbean, acquiring 4 islands in 1651. These were sold back to France in 1665, marking the end of the Knights' presence in the Americas, but it was a unique chapter in their global influence. And the 18th century opened a new chapter for Malta under the Order of St. John, shaped by power shifts across Europe and grand architectural changes on the island. Following the War of the Spanish Succession, the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht handed control of Sicily to the Duke of Savoy. For a brief period, the Duke held sovereignty over Malta, but just 7 years later, the Treaty of The Hague brought Sicily and Naples under the rule of Emperor Charles VI. Then in 1735, during the War of the Polish Succession, Charles, Duke of Parma, ousted Austrian forces and declared himself Charles VII of Naples in view of Sicily. To safeguard the island, the Knights began fortifying Malta's coastline. From 1714 onward, they built around 52 coastal batteries and redoubts across Malta and Gozo. New defensive structures also emerged, including Fort Chambray on Gozo, built between 1749 and the 1760s, and Fort Tigny in Massamxit, constructed from 1792 to 1795. The period also saw a surge in Baroque architecture, largely influenced by Grand Masters Antonio Manuel de Vilhena and Manuel Pinto de Fonseca, both Portuguese. Under de Vilhena, Medina was reshaped in the Baroque style, giving the medieval city a dramatic facelift. Fort Manuel and the renowned Manuel Theatre also date to this era. De Vilhena oversaw the development of Floriana, giving it the title Borgo Vilhena. Under Pinto's leadership, which spanned from 1741 to 1773, Baroque architecture flourished even further. Notable constructions from Pinto's era include the Auberge de Castile and the Valletta waterfront. However, not all was peaceful. Pinto's reign saw the thwarted conspiracy of the slaves in 1749, a revolt by Turkish slaves who planned to assassinate him but were stopped before they could act. Pinto was also a staunch advocate of the order's autonomy. In 1753, he declared Malta's sovereignty under the order, sparking a dispute with the Kingdom of Sicily, which still held claims over the island. However, by November 1754, relations were restored, and Sicily's influence over Malta waned. From this point on, Malta effectively became a sovereign state under the order. Despite these triumphs, the order's influence was waning by the late 1700s. Pinto's extravagant lifestyle had drained the treasury, leaving the order nearly bankrupt and unpopular with the Maltese people. In 1775, tensions erupted into the rising of the priests, a revolt led by disillusioned clergy and local leaders. Rebels seized Fort St. Elmo and St. James Cavalier, but the uprising was swiftly suppressed. Several leaders were executed, while others were imprisoned or exiled, underscoring the growing unrest. The order's situation worsened in 1792 as the French Revolution swept through France, seizing the order's assets in French territories and plunging it further into financial ruin. When Napoleon's forces arrived in Malta in 1798, the Knights, crippled by financial woes and lacking public support, surrendered without much of a fight. Napoleon occupied Malta briefly, but by 1800, the Maltese, with British assistance, managed to oust the French. Following the Treaty of Amiens, the British were supposed to return Malta to the order, but the island ultimately became a British protectorate. In a notable exchange, the new Grand Master, Giovanni Tomasi, demanded that British Civil Commissioner Alexander Ball vacate the Grand Master's palace in Valletta. Ball refused, arguing that some European powers still hadn't recognized Malta's independence and that British troops needed a base on the island. By 1813, Malta officially became a British colony, a status it held until gaining independence in 1964. The order, meanwhile, scattered across Europe. Eventually, in 1834, they established their headquarters in Rome, where they redirected their efforts toward humanitarian and religious causes. Today, known as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, their legacy endures from their base in Rome.